Joan has been an ethical culture leader since 1991. Before coming to the Riverdale Yonkers Society for Ethical Culture, she served ethical societies in Chicago, Northern Virginia, and Brooklyn. She continues to serve as the leader at Brooklyn and at Riverdale Yonkers, where she began in March of 2015. Joan was raised in the Midwest and is a third-generation humanist. Not many of us can say that. Before turning to congressional leadership as a profession, Joan managed information technology education departments for several Fortune 500 companies. Joan is also an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister and served a congregation in Southwest Michigan and the Church of the Larger Fellowship as their first cyber minister. Joan is a graduate of Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago and of the Humanist Institute, where she has served as a faculty member. She did her undergraduate work at the University of Chicago and has a BA from the Women in Management program at Mundelein College, the last private Catholic women's college in Illinois, founded by a justice-oriented women's religious order. See, I told you those nuns. Okay. Please welcome Jone Johnson Lewis, who will give us this morning's platform, Ethical Heroes, the Goldmark Sisters.
So I'm thinking we should do a quiz at the end of how many of the organizations mentioned in these first two categories in the back of your program I mentioned today. So we'll see. Now I'm using a new method of speaking which requires technology, so we're going to see how it works. Okay, every year I aim to give one platform that's about a person in history who I believe is an ethical hero. You know, ethical culture has no sacred scriptures or divine origin story. As a community, we focus on human worth and human connection as the central ideals and values. As the words above the room and downstairs here say, it is where people seek the highest that we find holy ground. Thus, the story of how some person seeks the highest, honoring human worth and human connection in some deep way, is the closest that we have to sacred story. We can learn from other lives how to work for social justice, how to nurture human relationships, and how to bring out our own best selves. So this year, in speaking to the two ethical societies that I serve, and now as a guest here, I chose to talk about not one person, but a group. 4 sisters that many of you have probably never heard of, unless you've been a student of progressive era history, or you've been around ethical culture a while, or you've heard of them from me because I'm a bit of a broken record on this whatever they are, the 4 women. You know, there's a systematic way that certain people are more hidden from history than others. For most of American history, the story is about named white men and unnamed people of color, unnamed women. And so we have now Black History Month and Native American History Month and Women's History Month to try to tell more of the story. But we don't have to wait for those months to do it. So today, 4 sisters. Each of them achieved a bit of notice in her lifetime and beyond, but all of them, their contributions didn't really rise to the level of being included in most history books, except as passing mentions or mistakes. And I'm going to talk about one rather humorous mistake a bit later. In this family, there were actually 11 Goldmark siblings. The 4 sisters weren't the only accomplished Goldmarks. So let me give you a little background on the Goldmarks. Their father was Dr. Jacob Joseph Goldmark, known as Joseph. He was born in 1819 in what was then part of Austria and is now part of Hungary. Like some other members of the Goldmark family, he is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. His tombstone notes, member of the First Constitutional Parliament of Austria. And then it has the quote, one whose voice rouses nations. One whose voice rouses nations. Someone with that quote ought to be known to us. I'm curious, how many of you know Joseph Goldmark's history? You know, he's another forgotten person. So let's go back for a minute to 1848. In that year, in many European nations and colonies, reformers and revolutionaries agitated for more civil freedoms and for political inclusion, ranging from peaceful reforms to armed revolutions. Great Britain, Germany, Poland, Ireland, Brazil, Denmark, Sicily, Italy, Switzerland. It was called the Spring of Nations. So ask yourself why you probably didn't hear about this in your history class. Dr. Joseph Goldmark was a physician and chemist, and he was part of the Austrian revolutions. Those revolutions that were nationalistic, seeking independence for various groups like Hungarians and Serbs, was part of it. But those revolutions were also liberal or socialist revolutions, opposing the reactionary politics of the Habsburg Empire. Joseph's mother had died when he was 3. Joseph lived with his maternal grandparents for the next 8 years in what is now Poland. And then Joseph returned to his father's home for what we'd call middle school. He went on to graduate from the University of Vienna with a degree in philosophy. He then graduated from medical school specializing in obstetrics. And then he went on to teach chemistry and did research at the Polytechnic Institute of Austria. In 1847, he presented a research paper on his invention with another man of a method to produce red phosphorus, a substance essential to making matches and also used in percussion caps in rifles. And then Joseph became involved in the 1848 revolution. For Joseph Goldmark, this was a fight for the freedom and rights of Jews, as well as a general fight for justice. And he wasn't just another fighter in that revolution. Joseph and his best friend, Adolf, and I'm probably going to murder his last name, Fischoff, gave speeches in March of 1848, which are credited with beginning the Austrian Revolution. After Joseph gave that speech, he headed the student committee, he headed a student committee and then an organized military